Okay, today we are here to talk about the Porsche GTS. So it's one of the most popular car you can actually get in the 911 trim, even though they are very expensive. They really have all the bells and whistles that people, expect when they buy this type of car. And in May 2024, with the 992.2 Porsche actually released an hybrid Porsche GTS. And now the GTS taking a whole different role in the 911 trim where it's not just a 911 with all new like gadget on it. It also has like an entire engine difference on it. So we want to go with Chris over the history of the Porsche 911 GTS, where it comes from, getting some perspective about what it was standing for so long and what it's becoming now. So let's get started about the history of the GTS. Right now we do have all the type of models that are coming with the GTS, like four-wheel drive, convertible. Every trim is available in GTS, but this started quite a long time ago, back in 1963. So Chris, tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about how the nameplate came about.
Yeah. So the GTS name itself actually is pretty much as old as the 911 itself. In 1964, with the 904 GTS that you see. So Porsche made this is a mid-engine race car that you see here. Porsche made a very few of these, but it was essentially designed to race at places like Targa Florio, for example, in the FIA GT1 class. And with Porsche, any of the nomenclature is kind of associated with the motorsport. Carrera, of course, refers to the La Carrera Panamericana. Here you have Targa Florio, so referring to the Targa Florio race. You have the 911 Targas these days with the rollover hoop. So the GTS name, I mean, has existed for a long time, and it has kind of expanded into other Porsche models across the brand's lineup. And here you can see even through the transaxle era cars, here's Walter Roll with the 924 GTS Rally. This is like a special edition that was made, and you also had it with the 928. So quite a few transaxle era cars also had the GTS trim. And here you can see a whole lineup of cars, including the Taycan GTS, all electric. So it's kind of expanded, into its own sub-brand, just like you've got the base Carreras and the GT models. So the GTS is its own line. And funny fact, the 1 millionth 911 that was ever made, I think 2017, was a GTS coupe, a 991 a generation coupe. So a very long lineage. So having said that, speaking of the 911, it was only in 2010 that we first saw the GTS name being associated with the 911 itself, with the 99 with the dot two update for the 997 generation, and
Yeah.
it
And, and,
debuted in
and I
about
and I think,
yeah.
yeah, and I think that one where was interesting is that when it came about, like everybody was really saying that it was just putting together a lot of the parts that
Yeah.
Porsche was trying to sell, all the option like center lock wheels, all the expensive interior refinish, and people saying, okay, it's just very expensive Carrera, and they are pretty much trying to make it looking as good as they can because people knew that the next car, the next generation was just about to come in. So it was interesting. People thought it looked really good. It had a lot of interesting facts, but it was priced pretty high. And I think it looked great. I didn't really see that many on the street. And again, people were really excited about the next gen car. So it was not so much as being also an option that you could buy when the car started because the 997.2, I think, started in 2008 and the GTS only came in 2010.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of time where you could not really even buy that one. So it was only for sale for a short period of time.
Yeah.
And it felt more like a gimmick, even though the GTS badge started to be on all other car of the lineup. I think it fitted really nicely the Porsche, the whole Porsche like multi-trim. Like they have so many different trim and options. I thought it was a great opportunity. But at the time, people were saying a little bit, okay, just save your money, buy a S, and you can buy other option you want to, but the GTS were a little bit bloated. And we know now
Yeah.
that, if we look at the used market, I mean, those cars are quite more valuable than the base car. But they're almost worth, I think, double the price than a 997 of the era. So they are very valuable right now, a little bit like the 993 S of the time. And I think also we
Yeah,
have to remember that the GTS badge, it was also a little bit that same type of thing that with the 997, the base and the S, it's just a small increment, like a power brakes. But on the previous generation, like the 993, the 993S and 4S, they were kind of a big deal. And again, now they were only on the white body. And now if you want to buy one,
yeah,
they are like, again, horribly expensive. So when they brought out the GTS, I think they actually were able to replicate a lot of the magic from the
yeah,
993S era. And the magic really has been carried on for quite some time on those cars as they are quite special. So I think Chris, you made a pretty interesting little graph here, like putting
yeah,
together all the different trends where I really like it that there is not really a Porsche GTS. It's just a trim from the Carrera model, but it really has its own place there where it's a little bit more
yeah,
power on top of the 911 branch. So I think it's an interesting badge. You have to pay quite some money to get it, but again, with what we are seeing now in 2024, the car is taking an even more special place in Porsche's heart. Like I guess they're not gonna really call the Porsche 911 hybrid. I think that they said,
yeah,
okay, let's take the GTS and let's call it that way. And so they're kind of like moving the GTS badge here from the right side as a sub trim. It's almost like they are moving the GTS badge back here on the left, like between the Carrera and the GT, you have the GTS that
yeah.
has its own spots that are really pushing the limit on what's going on here. But again, we'll talk about this a bit more later. But let's talk about how they defined the Carrera GTS back then in 2010.
I think they essentially found a gap in the market. So who exactly is the ideal GTS customer? It's or a buyer. You know, it's probably somebody who doesn't want something that's as extreme as one of the GT cars. You know, extremely firm ride, etc. It's totally unlivable. You don't really have much in the name of creature comforts, at least out of the box on paper. But it's still got more oomph than your base Carreras. So that's essentially, it kind of hits that sweet spot. And even I looked at the brochure for the 997.2, and Walter Rohr had a quote where he said it's essentially getting, you know, it's as sharp as a GT, but it borrows a lot from the turbo models as well. So it's kind of in that sweet spot, and even Porsche has just managed to carve out a niche in that crowded space. And there are a few ways to kind of tell these more desirable GTS models apart. Like here that you see the black accents are an easy giveaway. I essentially wanted to highlight this because unless you're a Porsche person, which where you might think they all pretty much look the same, there are very subtle things that kind of distinguish each trim and model from each other. So with the GTS, you've got the black exterior trim that I mentioned, the blacked out wheels, central lock wheels. Then you got, you know, a much more sportier race text or interior, Alcantara, if you will. These are kind of the highlights that distinguish GTS models from other Carrera trims. It's also worth noting that the GTS is the highest in the Carrera family. It's the most powerful Carrera model, and it kind of occupies the, you know, the very top before the GT line starts.
Yeah, even
Yeah,
before they had special engine, they would kind of always try to throw in there whatever kind of airbox or ECU tuning they could have to extract the most power out of the engine without really usually making a completely different engine. They would take again some of the parts being from the upgrade accessories you could buy again, like airbox or software tuning to make them a little bit more powerful. They would also usually have the exhaust note, which would be
yeah,
a little bit specific. I cannot tell for sure if it was just the S with the sport exhaust package or if they had something even a little bit more, but the sound would usually be vastly improved on the GTS. What's interesting about the whole Sportex or what was called Alcantara
race.
before,
Yeah,
yeah, is that it was really a trim of the GTS of the finishing of the seats and the interior that you could only get in the GTS. So you could not have this type of class covering without the GTS. But a lot of people were thinking that it was either looking too sporty or they were worrying that it would wear down after use. So you could still opt out for those. And here on this photo, you can see the steering wheel, for example, is covered in leather. And you could
yeah,
actually out of the GTS interior package most of the time, if I remember, I think on all GTS, and get a full leather interior if you wanted. Even though I think for resale, people are kind of expecting those cars to look like that. Personally, I'm a
yeah.
big fan of it, but if you just want to buy it as just the most luxurious 911 that's not a GT car, not a turbo, I can see why you would want full leather. And also, most of those cars will usually have the black interior, but I think you
Yeah,
could get them in different color. Even though, as far as I'm trying to think of, I don't even know if I've ever seen one with a different interior than black. But I think it was possible. But again, it was all usually leather covered, like dashboard, like the full leather was pretty much every time on those cars. Yeah, we can see like the aluminum lever, aluminum handbrake. So it
yeah,
would have a lot of the accessories you could potentially buy on the S. They would be on the GTS.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, and so they already had, so for the 997, I think they had the convertible. I think they had also the four-wheel
yeah,
drive. So they already had, when it started, a couple of different variations. I think it's important to
yeah,
know that Porsche still sell the convertible. I think is the best selling trim they have. Most people buy a Porsche convertible really. So I think it made sense to have it on the convertible. And that's why if you find a Carrera GTS coupe with a manual gearbox, you really have an expensive car in your hand, because that's now the more valuable. But usually people would again take the convertible automatic. That's what most of the people who buy Porsches these days are getting. And again, that so they continued after that on
yeah.
the 991.1, and I think they came out and they added one more trim with the Targa, right?
Yeah, they looked at the success, or I mean, the 997.2 generation, and it was quite successful. In fact, despite the premium price, GTS models are generally 20 to 30% more expensive than the base models, base Carrera models, and they were selling in pretty good numbers. So Porsche decided to expand the lineup to also include a Targa variant. Again, it's going to have manual automatic, both, and also the body styles coupe, cabriolet, and now the Targa, and rear wheel drive, or Carrera 4 GTS with all wheel drive.
Yeah, they
So
pretty much
you
have all the
yeah,
trains. So it's actually funny because the GTS was supposed to be a little bit the sportier car between the S and the GT3. So you'd
yeah,
think, okay, they would keep it like coupe manual only, or maybe the PDK is fine, but the coupe more lightweight version. But in the end, they had like the Targa. I remember for the press car when those things came out in 991, everybody
yeah,
was driving the Porsche Targa in Spain, and they would say, "Oh, fantastic car!" But really, like if you're buying a driver's car, maybe a coupe two-wheel drive would make more sense. But
yeah,
people again often just want everything. They want the coupe, the convertible, they want four-wheel drive for the safety. So I can see why people would want to buy the car in that way. But in the end, yeah, they could be a pretty heavy car. And my favorite thing of the GTS is the exterior red color. I think that dark kind of red thing's kind of a trademark of the GTS. I don't think you can get that red without
yeah,
the GTS. So I think they had a couple of specific color, but I really definitely like that red. And I'm sure some people would have sometime opt out getting the GTS just to get some special color that are offered there. I think for the 991, I mean, the red stitches also on the inside match that red outside pretty well, because I think
yeah,
part of the GTS interior package with the Alcantara suite always come with the red stitching. So if you buy a
yeah,
car which is gray or whatever color, you're still gonna get the red stitching. So it's a good match to have the exterior color fitting that stitching, because a little bit like often on BMWs, I think on the M car, like
yeah,
the 1M, stuff like that, they came out with orange stitching. Whatever
yeah,
car color you buy, they just have one stitching color. So that's a good
yeah.
pairing there.
Yeah, so with the 991, there was one particular thing that I also wanted to highlight with the 991.2 is the engines. The powertrain got a massive upgrade in terms of being the first one to be turbocharged. So that was a big change that happened over there.
Yeah.
So right from the base models, they started to be turbocharged. And moving on to the 992.1, the one that is the one that was the predecessor to the current one. I mean, they refined the exhaust package. You spoke about the exhaust. And you also had a optional lightweight package that was available for the first time. Even the interior was a lot more refined, despite being a more sportier version. Porsche claims it's a lot more quieter than before. So it really started to shift nudge a little towards that luxury side of things, rather than being a purely sporty hardcore variant. So here you can see the evolution of the 911 GTS range over the years. You can see with the 991.2, as I just mentioned, it became a turbocharged, and there's incremental increase in power, 430, 450, 480 over the years.
Yeah.
And if you look at the 997.2, as I mentioned, there's no Targa variant. So that is something. excuse me, that you want to
Yeah.
keep in mind.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I
the
think for the engine, I wanted to bring before that something that's quite interesting and very frustrating for the GTS owner is that so they went from 3.8 directly to 3 liter supercharged, which again the turbocharged, sorry, the
yeah,
turbocharger is great because you can have a lot of tuning on it. But unfortunately, they never had a GTS 4 liter. So it's
yeah,
actually very strange that they actually offered a 4 liter Cayman, and so it was very weird that there was not offering a GTS 4 liter. I guess they wanted to keep that for the GT3, but it was something that I think that what is the best GTS is the GTS that I think that they never made. They should
yeah,
have made a 991 or even, yeah, 991.1 4 liter before switching to turbo. That
yeah,
would really have made a lot of sense. And that car, I guess, would have been the kind of the best car you could get, even though I guess a lot of people still see the 997.2 as the best one because it still had the hydraulic steering and has
yeah.
the most like the smaller form factor, smaller car, lots of power, modern technology, but still the old
It's a
kind
little,
of dynamic with less electronics. So I think in my book that's the best one. But yeah, it was tough to switch to turbocharge without sending off the GTS model with a 4 liter. And now that we know the 992.2 is hybrid, even if they do a 4 liter out this, which I'm sure I don't see why they would want to do that. But yeah, I don't think we're gonna get that. So if you want to have the flat six 4 liter, there's still no alternative to the GT3, which I guess they did
yeah.
that on purpose.
Yeah, that was intentional. I mean, even on the Cayman, they specifically highlight 4.0 next to the
Yeah.
GTS badge, just to signify it's got the bigger engine than the naturally aspirated engine. So yeah, that brings us to the first ever production hybrid 911. I'm saying production because Porsche did play around with the idea of a hybrid 911 back in 2010 with the 997 GT3R that you see here. It had a flywheel-based system to kind of capture energy and put it back in the battery, and that used to provide some additional power. So this happened in 2010. This brings us to the T hybrid system that was introduced earlier this year in May. And there are fundamentally a few differences when you compare it to Porsche's e-hybrid system that you see on more mainstream cars like the Panamera, the Cayenne. So that's a plug-in hybrid. Porsche is calling this as a performance hybrid to kind of make hybrids are cool these days. Let's face it. I mean, most supercars and hypercars. I mean, gone are the days of the Prius when when your hybrids were considered not so cool. Hybrids are cool, and Porsche is kind of heading in that direction, of hybridization. I think that's the right move. I'm not so sure specifically about the 911. Just to recap on how the system works, the 3.6 unit is all new. This is 3.6 liter, and you've got two electric motors, one in the PDK gearbox and one in the turbocharger, which kind of makes the entire engine a lot more compact. So it essentially eliminates turbo lag. And believe it or not, the current GTS is quicker than the outgoing 992.1 Turbo S around the Nürburgring. So quite a few strides that Porsche has tried to make in order to justify the hybridization. So you're not going to get any all electric range. This is purely a performance hybrid.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
yeah,
for what we're saying for the hybrid, I think what's important to say here is that I mean it's going to be a very complex system. Here it looks pretty simple. Okay, you just have two orange cable going in the front, then going in the back. But the truth is that those cars are going to be quite complicated to maintain. So even though the feel is great, there's some good improvement. But I mean, personally, I'm a little bit worried about how those cars are going to fare in the future in terms of how you're going to maintain it. It is difficult to deal with high power voltage
yeah,
mechanics. There are some risk of shocks. People are going to be worried working on those cars. So you have the power of the turbo car, and it's a cool modern electric hybrid. And I'm sure the delivery is going to be even better because you don't have to worry about turbo spooling and all those things. But
yeah,
as you can see, the packaging is very compact and it's going to be super complex. On top of the mechanical, you're going to have a lot of electronics, you're going to have more cooling requirements. So, personally, as much as I love the idea of the tech when it's brand new, it's great. But at some point, I even have a hard time understanding why they did it. Maybe again on their most expensive car for the turbo, it's going to make even more sense. But
Yeah,
I'm definitely gonna miss them not having a 4 liter or higher displacement GTS car and going for the hybrid. I guess it's nice and dandy. Maybe it's a good way for them to have lower emission standard for the brand as a whole and help a little bit with what's happening in Europe with the carbon emission maximum. But the car is exciting, definitely really fast. But I think if you buy a car like this, you really have to think about how you're gonna maintain it. And even the Porsche dealership, I think those cars are gonna be out to maintain. A lot of special parts are coming in. So when you think about it, like, do you really need all that complication? You could just get a car without all that, and it's still a pretty closed system. So for me personally, I really think it's really pointless. I'm I'm kind of against it. Aside of it's a cool offering that they're really showing up, but I think if it was just a concept car, I think that would be good enough for me. I would really try to stay away from this because the maintenance is going to be really tough. I mean, those
yeah,
cars, they're performance cars, so they heat. There's a lot of heat management that have to be taken into consideration, and all the electronic parts really are made out of plastic, and
yeah,
plastic just does not wear well with it. So as
yeah.
much as Porsche, they're doing great job with reliability with their engine. I think there's really nothing they can do unless they tell me that they came up with a new plastic composite that just does not wear out with heat. I'm just not buying it when I see the turbo with all those little cables everywhere. I mean, I'm just quite worried. And when I look at what happened to BMW problems for the past 10 years with all their turbocharged, it's all about overheating pieces, the hoses, the electronics. I mean, nothing survives. So personally, I'm kind of stay away from that car, but the sales have always been
Yeah,
fantastic. So I guess
yeah,
people still gonna want to buy the top of the line. It's the coolest factor. People who buy brand new car, I guess, don't really care about depreciation so much. But I think this one may be the first Carrera GTS to actually be depreciating more than the base car, if you ask me, because on the used market, this is gonna be a really tough proposition. So excited about the tech, but I'm quite
yeah.
worried about what's going to happen. And so
I mean,
I think
yeah.
it's also a good example for going to happen with the turbo. What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I was actually wondering why did Porsche choose the GTS, to launch the T hybrid system, this new bit of, hybrid tech that they're going to roll across the 911 range. Why was the GTS chosen? So I looked up some forums just to look at sales figures, and as you saw in the previous slide, I mean, the GTS sells really well, as I think I also already mentioned that, just sometimes even exceeding, the base models in some cases. And it was a dealer up in Porsche of Irvine who actually said this, the GTS is extremely popular. So that's one of the reasons why they chose to, you probably chose the GTS, could be a great way to kind of introduce this new hybrid tech. With it could be a precursor to the turbo models that are coming, just to see market reception on the most popular trend. How are people actually warming up to it? What's the feedback been like? Because let's face it, I mean, this is like a 996 moment that we're having. You went from air cooled to water cooled, and you had the controversial headlight design up front. So this is a pretty big deal. So this GTS in particular, 992.2, is very noteworthy, and it's probably making a pretty big, significant shift in a product strategy. So there are some reasons why you may still want to look at the outgoing GTS. Apart from the price increase that over the outgoing model, there are a few reasons why a 2024 model could actually be interesting. One of them could be, there's no more analog tachometer, that's gone on the interior. And the start style, the Le Mans style shifter, that's no longer available either. It's just a generic start stop button. We've seen this also being rolled out with other 992.2 models on the Carrera, on the GT3, for example. It's also gone, and one of them, I think on the Touring, it's still available. And then no longer a manual that is available with the GTS. So if you still want a stick and three pedals, you want that bit of engagement, choosing the outgoing model could make a little more sense, because the T hybrid system, I mean, because the PDK is inside that, the transmission itself, so it's not compatible with manuals. That's what I've come to learn.
Yeah, I
So
think that's
yeah,
it's kind of a big deal there. Like again, the GTS is really getting less of a driver car, but more of that high technology geeky car. And I guess it's a good thing that Porsche introduced the Carrera T at some point
Yes.
for people who want something that's a little bit more involved without the luxury. I guess they're trying to separate this. If you want, yeah, if you want the involvement, you have the Carrera T with a little bit less noise insulation, kind of like the S performance. So I think they're
Yeah.
segmenting things. I guess they focus group this and they realize that this type of buyer, especially at this type of price point, they want to have all the latest tech. And I guess if I was going to spend that kind of money, I would also want to have the latest and greatest. So there's definitely a cool factor of being able to, let's say you bought a bunch of GTS in the past 20 years, you want to buy a new one. If it's just again the same old GTS with a little bit more power into it, it can get old. While if now they're bringing something, there's a whole electronic things, and but you don't have to buy an EV car. I
Yeah.
can see the appeal for the buyer. I just think, yeah, I don't think the buying the more expensive car thinking you're going to have good resale value. I don't think that's going to play out on this model. I think you have a slide here where you try to look a little
Yes.
bit at the different pricing. Where, as you mentioned, the GTS normally is around 20-30% more expensive than the base car, even though
Yes.
lately it's almost like double because they really, over the years, they really went nuts with the different options and the different trim. They definitely resell better because people are still looking for it. But for this hybrid model, I'm really curious to see what's going to happen because it's going to be tricky to maintain.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, long-term reliability, I mean, with the rollout of any kind of new technology, I mean, the first adopters will be the ones to actually answer that call and how it fares in the long run. But I
Yeah,
mean, if we look at, the GTS was available for quite some time, the 991.1 and 991.2. You can see that the base models are pretty, they haven't really held their value as good as well as GTSs have from the same time. The good part is they kind of hit that sweet spot. They're not astronomical as the GT3. The GT3 market went crazy even during COVID, and beyond that, it's only starting to pull off now. So, I mean, it's still, even on the secondary market, it's far more desirable. You can see, a lesser this data is from classic.com, so you can look this up. This is the most recent data. So they kind of hit that sweet spot and kind of retaining value, but they're not as extreme as,
yeah.
or volatile, should I say, as the GT3 market.
Yeah, and I think we haven't talked about also who those cars are for. I mean, to closing thought about the GTS is really that it's really the car for the guy who drives and faster than most people want to be on top of the car. Like the car S, of course, is plenty fast, but somebody who's really wanting to use the power, obviously, has the money to spend more into a car that's going to be a little nicer looking with a few nicer options, but who doesn't want to drive a GT3 because a GT3 is
Yeah,
just too fast and also too focused for the track. It's noisier. It's the steering, everything is so sharp to a point that it's hard to have a relaxed drive around town where you drive at a good fast pace, but you're not like, like driving for to save your life like in a GT3 pretty much. So there's really a special space. And it is, I think, for me, the sweet spot without buying a turbo car. Again, the turbo being often too fast, again, unless you really live in a place with you have a lot of open space. I think the GTS is the ideal Porsche 911. So I think it will retain that very high usability with the hybrid as well. Having this time literally under when you're not at crazy high speed, I think the car is going to be, it's pretty much like a mini Porsche turbo, pretty much. Actually, not even a mini because it's even faster than the turbo,
yeah,
but it's gonna be a little cheaper and it's not gonna be a top of the line. And at this time, I mean, I guess it's almost the same price or maybe even more expensive now than the Porsche turbo. But when the
yeah.
new turbo comes in, and we are comparing those two cars equal, I think the turbo is gonna be again crazy fast and crazy expensive as well. I mean, I think
So
we are all thinking that the turbo is gonna be pretty much a GTS like on steroids. So I guess that the car is going to make even more sense now, even though I really don't see how much faster people can go on the street.
yeah, I mean, I think it's between 160 and 170 right now. That's where the GTS is sitting at. I mean, it's funny you have to say that, but when it started with the 997.2, it was just over 100. So you can see that price increase over time over the past 13 odd for 14 years. And with the 911 Turbo, again, I mean, there's going to be one model which is not going to feature the hybrid. We don't know which one it is. I think it's just going to be the standard turbo that won't feature any hybridization. Probably that one will have the
Yeah,
manual. Yeah,
yeah, it's very possible, yeah, that actually the turbo remains a turbo and in a
yeah,
more like truer classic form, and
yeah,
that then they will again really keep on digging on the GTS thing, being more and more hybrid, and maybe actually they will expand on the GTS, having maybe more hybrid capacity. Maybe in a few years they're gonna have a plug-in hybrid if they can create a niche for that car. People who want the electrification, maybe we
yeah.
need to drive electric. That's their door. Like they're just opening a tiny door for, okay, we have a special car now. We're going to give you the other classic. You have the T, you have the turbo. Let us play with a hybrid version under the GTS badge. So it does not have an ugly name.
I mean,
And I can totally see how they could suppress, let's say, the front trunk, put a bigger battery, and they can turn this into a plug-in hybrid in no time.
yeah, I mean, the Porsche will have to play around with the 911 because very soon we're going to have the all-electric 718 that's going to be hitting the market. And that will leave no choice because even though the market for EVs has cooled off, Porsche, I mean, there are talks about retrofitting maybe a gas engine into that new 718 chassis. I don't know how that could happen. I think it's too late in the development cycle that but there have been some rumors that Porsche could possibly actually introduce internal combustion engines. So until,
Mhm.
we get to that all-electric 911, which I don't think is happening, thankfully, in this decade, and we still have 5 to 6 years to play with gasoline power, I think Porsche will gradually kind of head in that direction of
Yeah.
hybridization and kind of evolve the hybrid story.
And they have so many trim. I think that the hybrid there, I mean, even though again, as you can tell, I really don't like it. I think they really open a nice little space for potentially develop a hybrid, see how it works, maybe then a plug-in hybrid, and then even later on a full electric car, while
Yeah,
still keeping their option open with, okay, we still have the basic car, we have the T, we have the turbo, we have all those cars. And maybe I would not be surprised in the future for them to do a four-cylinder turbo. Like, I mean, that's kind of where it's happening. So I think they have a lot of trim. They really master the way of having one good flexible platform to have all those different things in. And as you mentioned, we know that there's a Macan EV. There's going to be the 718X Boxster. It's going to be for sure. So it's
yeah,
coming. That I don't know. They're putting it off, but it seems that they are able to maintain all those different things running at the same time. I guess, unfortunately, as you mentioned, also is that the prices of those cars just gone through the roof. They have always
yeah,
been expensive, but since COVID, it's almost like they are taking advantage, and the price have almost doubled. It's also why that explain why the used one are so expensive, because the alternative or used one, if you want to buy a new one, are just so much more expensive that the price are just through the roof. So I mean, it's getting a little bit crazy. I was actually watching a forum post, I think a few days ago, where a guy said, "Hey, I had an allocation for 911 GT3 and I turned it down." And we all know that people are pretty much ready to kill family members to get allocation on those cars. But the guy
yeah.
was saying at this kind of price point is just so expensive, plus the dealership markup. The guy said, I could just buy a Ferrari, a pickup truck, and a trailer, and then 6 months vacation. It's for the same price. So the guy saying, yes, it doesn't really make sense to buy a car that expensive. So I think they are playing a dangerous game where right now everything is nice and dandy and people are really ready to put that kind of money in those cars. But I would not be surprised if in the future they have to lower their price a little bit, like Tesla. This thing
Yeah,
was getting really expensive, and
yeah,
very quickly they realized that they had to really lower the price because the cars are just not selling. So lucky for them, it's still selling. But I think we're really touching like the top of the market here. Things are very expensive. And the hybrid is a little bit like remind me of the 2000s before the internet bubble exploded, where Mercedes and BMW came out with those V12 engine, those very complex cars. And it was all great while everything was selling like hotcakes. But when it stopped, then they obviously realized that those cars made no sense. So again, for the hybrid, let's see what's going to happen. I'm not
yeah.
a fan, but I hope now that everybody knows a little bit more where the GTS comes from, and feel reassured that it has its place there, and hopefully it's not going to bother the rest of the lineup. Any other closing thought before we end this up?
Yeah, I had one final closing thought. I mean, this again comes back to pricing. The outgoing 992.1 GT3 had a starting MSRP of just over 160. So a GTS is now more expensive than the old GT3. So And the current GT3, the 992.2 that we just saw a few weeks back, has seen a massive jump to 220. And this is just the MSRP. We're not
Yeah,
talking about anything
yeah.
on top of that,
Yeah, and
or
you
no
can
options.
choose $50,000 on this if you want to have even electric seats on those things. So as they go crazy
Yeah.
with the option. Yeah, with Porsche, the price always like you cannot buy a sticker price car because literally they don't even have like the most basic function like electric mirrors or like night view mirrors. That price is really like how to get you in, but they're always much more expensive. At least with the hybrid, I understand. I mean, there is all that technology that they put in, but again, I think for them to build it and to put it together, it's all nice and dandy, and it's not that hard. But I can tell you that mechanics to maintain those cars, they're gonna have a very hard time. And if you have to maintain at the dealership, even at the dealership, I think it's gonna be hard. I think car mechanics have already been struggling with the modern technology of turbocharger and all those things. It's difficult for them to maintain those cars. But plus the hybrid in it, I think it's gonna be a can of worms to own those cars. So again, my position, it's absolutely not. But if you enjoy it, please mention in the comments below why you think the hybrid is a good idea. I think it's crazy, but please tell us, if you plan on buying one. If not, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you, Chris. Again, if you want to read more in detail about this, go on motorheads.com. Chris set up the slideshow and made an article about it. And we'll come back very soon for another video. If you liked it, you know what to do. Thank you very much. Bye, Chris. Then.
Bye, Phil.